Welcome to TMBS. I'm Matt Leck. With me is Lisha Brooks and David Griscom. Tonight on the program, an interview with Dr. Drew Mikhael, who has been on the program before, talking about the explosion and rage in Beirut, Lebanon. We have a good conversation with him. Also, David Griscom is going to tell us about the repressive and ideological state apparatuses. And teach us about the need for class conflict in this country. A new message from David. No, I'm just joking. But before we get there, I want to throw over to Lisha. She's got a few announcements and messages for us. Yeah.
Tonight's dinner.
Agenda items.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I guess my joke wasn't funny, so you didn't laugh, so I thought I was good.
I was focused on producing.
It's okay. It was a very subpar joke. I guess I just want to start out, I was thinking a lot because of the pandemic. Normally when you lose someone, you kind of grieve together and you sit and you have food and you're surrounded by family. And, we can't really do that. We have to limit who we're around, and it's been like this very surreal thing of like grieving digitally with people all around the globe. And it's been such a source of comfort for me. And I just want to thank all the people that have reached out to, me and Matt and David and, my family and everyone that was, personally in Michael's life. I mean, this thing is a fucking nightmare. I just keep looking at my mom. We're like, this couldn't have happened. Like I think every week I come on the show and I'm basically in a new state of denial. But it really, I got a call on Monday morning saying that Mike was in a critical condition, and then within 2 hours he was dead. And that instant, and by the way, a lot of our family members or community members, it kind of feels more intimate than just strangers digitally at this point. A lot of people who are part of the TMBS family have lost people, have lost siblings, have lost parents in equally unfair, if not, more unfair and brutal ways. So there's been a tremendous amount of loss. Professor Milton Al-Amadi, he lost his beautiful, incredible sister Barbara back in the spring, and people have just been messaging me their own stories. So it's hard for our brains to accept, and the fact that everyone has just been so human throughout this process, the fact that there hasn't, and I don't want to jinx myself, but there hasn't been like cruel commentary online, the fact that people have just messaged so honestly has really made a world of difference. We're getting beautiful art of Michael. This is a painting made by, I'm gonna butcher your last name, I'm so sorry, Nicholas Nadeau. He even sent me an audio note. So thank you, Nicholas, and thank you to other fans and friends who are sending such beautiful gifts. It's so personal and kind. I kind of wanted to comment on what happened medically with Michael. I misspoke a bit on the majority report, mostly because we just didn't know at the time. And all we definitively knew was that it wasn't COVID, because it was a negative COVID test. We knew it wasn't suicide because he didn't kill himself. And we knew it wasn't overdose because he had no drugs in his system and he wasn't, someone that used drugs. So I kind of jumped the gun to explain what happened before I had been told. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about what we knew that happened. So if hearing about this is going to make you feel uncomfortable, or if it's too much, just I'm probably going to speak for about a minute. So feel free to, turn the volume down or pull out your earplugs or whatever. So essentially, Michael had a blood clot in his body. It seems like it originated somewhere in his legs or his thighs, somewhere lower in his body, and it traveled up to his heart. And it was like a saddle blood clot, and it cut off circulation from his heart and basically made him start to suffocate. And his brain couldn't get oxygen. And so they rushed him to the hospital, and he was resuscitated 3 times. And they worked very hard to resuscitate him, especially because of his age and his health. It wasn't like, a 100-year-old person who, complications later in life. The fourth time they were not able to resuscitate him, which, is just devastating to know. But the truth of the matter was probably his brain would have been very, very, very deeply impacted because of the lack of oxygen and blood. So even if they had resuscitated him, it might have been a pretty challenging road ahead, and he might not have really ever been back the way we knew him. I don't know if that's in any way a comfort. I know that Michael, without his brilliant brain in full tact, definitely would have been a really challenging reality. I know that he would have been very frustrated and irritated, and I don't really find comfort in that, but I don't know. I guess the fact that suffering was maybe less than what it could have been is a small comfort. I don't know. The language around like death and loss is like stay strong, like find comfort. It's like, what does this language mean? I don't know. But because this community and this thing has happened that's so intimate, even though we're all around the world and we don't actually know each other like person to person in physical connection, I felt like I had to speak a little bit more clearly about what happened. And it just seems like there was something biological or hereditary in our blood. There was no toxins, there was no virus, there was no drugs, there was no allergy medicine, there was really nothing. They're continuing to look, and obviously it's very important for us to try and figure it out if I ever have kids, or for other family members to know if this is something that we just don't know about, that could happen to anyone. So all I really can say is value your one precious life, and whenever possible, be kind, which I think was really what Michael was starting to put out there, was just compassion for the individual. So whenever you can, I know it can be hard as fuck, but we don't know how long we have here, so I was good with Michael. We had a great conversation the night before. Our relationship was in such a good place. I can't imagine if there had been like a stupid fight or a call, not returned, what that would be like right now. I feel so grateful.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking about things like that too, and like the little tiny things that make you feel a little bit better, even though like it doesn't change the situation at all. But I mean, I always talk about where I was at with Michael on his book, and I'm glad we had those moments where we could tell, like we got sentimental after a few beers in the live shows, in backstage and stuff like that, and just those having had those things, I guess they're make it feel just a little bit less bitter. And also I wanted to say thanks everybody. I probably spent way too much time on social media, especially on Twitter, reading everything, especially those first couple days. But I appreciated everybody who sent stuff because it was really nice.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with both of y'all there, especially all the messages that we are continuing to receive have meant so much to not have the feeling of going through such a tremendous loss alone. And I really want to thank both Matt and Lisha and the family in general for being so strong and forthright in this like really difficult time. I really appreciate it. I was really lucky over last week to be able to take a little time for myself and go out to the country for a little bit. And I felt it was really amazing because I got to feel really close to Michael, especially after visiting where he was from for the service, and knowing that this kind of like New York, boy also had a deep love for stillness and mountains and trees. I was able to feel really close for him. So I'm trying, and I think everyone else is the same thing, in the same kind of mode, trying to find those kind of spaces of connection still. And just one last note on this too, one thing that I'm still trying to, we're all learning so many lessons, and we did learn so many lessons, but one thing that is really amazing about all these messages that we get from Michael is how many people he was in contact with. I'll just say, in my experience, sometimes we'd have people come into the studio. They'd walk up to Michael, give him a high five, and we'd hang out, and then we'd go out for beers after the show. And I would have assumed that they had known each other. They were childhood friends. Joshua is a great example of that. I thought that they had known each other forever, and then I find out that they had just started talking around 6 months ago. So I think one thing I'm really trying to take from this is it's really a beautiful thing to be open to creating new relationships with people. When a lot of folks really close off and they find their friend group, there's always more people out there that you can build really beautiful, meaningful relationships with. So that's definitely something I'm trying to take with me going forward.
Yeah, it's funny. I mentioned the exact same thing to Drew. It felt like Drew and Michael went back like a decade. We'll get to that interview after David gives us the monologue.
Yeah,
the late night monologue.
Well, so let's start here. We all know this crisis that we're experiencing, this COVID crisis and this economic crisis that's coming with us, has really made the divisions between the rich and the rest of us clearer than ever. And America is such a cesspool of ideology. There is all these myths that go on that have basically divided the vast majority of people who are working class and made them think, that you might own a home and you're closer to Elon Musk than you are to, the worker at McDonald's, when that's not the case at all. Even for these people who are comfortably middle class, they're seeing how close they are to complete deprivation. And as you're seeing all of these people really unable to make their basic payments, the complete failure of Congress to show up with any kind of proper stimulus response to the economic crisis has made a lot of people realize just how much they've been teetering. For the people who've lost their jobs, this has obviously been tremendously hard. But even for those people who are returning to work, they're coming back into a much different world. And for many people, the job growth has not matched what was lost during the pandemic. July's unemployment numbers, which is still not the best metric to look at, but it's still very high at 10.2%. The United States has only recovered less than half of the jobs that were lost because of the pandemic. As I mentioned before, the complete failure of Congress to basically create a robust social safety net has really added to this crisis. Other indications of how dire this picture is: 1/3 of households, around 32%, owed money for missed rent or mortgage payments from previous months at the beginning of August. So this is a crisis that's being felt by renters and by people who have mortgages on their homes. And let's not forget that things are bad enough now, but there are so many debts that are in forbearance or in payment deferral programs, student loans, credit cards, cars, mortgages. And what's going to happen when all these payments are reintroduced to their life, especially when so many people have lost their income? Now, I say this to compare this to what's happening for the super rich. Billionaires have profited immensely since the beginning of this crisis. Around the American billionaires' fortunes have grown around $637 billion since the crisis started. 50 billion alone for Jeff Bezos. It's a really stark example of the two vast realities that we're all living in. Yeah, there's a big difference between people who are low-wage workers in the working class and people in the middle class, but they are much closer than any of us are to these super rich people. And the reason that I want to highlight this and why it's so important is because people are really struggling right now. And this is a moment that should be a massive opportunity for the left. This is a moment that the left should be seizing and really winning on our message, because we have the solutions to these problems. But yet we're seeing, the rise of centrist neoliberalism in response. There are really encouraging signs. Obviously, these Black Lives Matter protests have been incredible, and they're continuing, and the fight is there, and people are activated and willing to work. But what we need to do to unite all of these people who are so threatened by this system, we need to be doing much, much more. And we have not risen to the challenge. Now, the way that the middle class basically turns on, the more working class is so centered in ideology. And I just wanted to introduce people to two really interesting concepts to try to situate ourselves as we try to find ways to fight. And these are the two different apparatuses of the state. Something that was developed by Althusser, who's one of the great sort of old school Marxist philosophers. And he theorized these two different apparatuses of the state: the ideological state apparatus and the repressive state apparatus. And the repressive state apparatus is pretty simple to understand. That's the police, that's the military, and that's the courts, right? And when you are, for example, at a Black Lives Matter protest and the police are firing weapons into a group of protesters, it becomes really clear that you are on the opposite side of the state. You are on the opposite side of the system, right? But the repressive state apparatus only comes out when the state is severely threatened, because states prefer to operate in what Althusser would call the ideological state apparatus. And that's like where we really need to be prepared to focus our attention on, and then to be very clear about how these systems work. So the ideological state apparatus, you have to understand that it's not necessarily like the state as in the government. It's really like the forms that keep this system afloat. It's the forms that keep capitalism as our social economic system functioning from generation to generation. So, systems of the ideological state apparatus, they're cultural institutions. Obviously, media is a big part of that. Social institutions, education. If Matt, if you could pull up this tweet right here, it's what happens when you are faced with a situation and you have that logic that's ingrained in you from when you were very young, how you think about the world. And there's a really great Twitter account that has been getting these sort of ironic posts called "Accidentally Left Wing," that really hit on that moment where people are faced with a problem, they come up with a solution, and then they actually treat it as something that's absurd or ridiculous, to push forward in the first place. And I can go forward for a second. These things, they come from actual material reality too. And that's really an important thing to make that distinction, because it's not just that like these ideas are floating around. They are structures, they are forces. This is the way that people who write for media are sort of told, like, okay, this is a story that's reasonable, or is the kind of thing that we're going to publish. It's the way that teachers are taught, these are the ways that we're going to cover history. All these things come from a very material basis. They're not necessarily focused on ideas. And I can go forward with a really great example from, here we go. So this tweet reads, "The thing is, housing shouldn't be treated as a commodity since it's necessary for people to survive." Somebody replied saying, "Food, medicine, should these also be decommodified?" And obviously the answer is yes. But that's functionally that's ideology, right? That's not necessarily saying that's like the ideological state apparatus, but that's its function, because what it does is it puts ideas in your brain that you actually revert to. So when you're faced with an opportunity to organize or to think differently about politics or society, you actually revert to things. And that's where the ideological state apparatus is so strong. And just lastly, before I move forward, just so you understand that there's a relationship there. When the ideological state apparatus is weak, then you need the police to come in and say, these are the rules. We have the military, we have the power, and we're going to force you to do certain things. And you can really see the difference in governance when you look at, for example, like post-colonial or colonial governments. Frantz Fanon, who is a really important thinker, someone that Michael respected a lot as well, really highlights this well in this passage that I'm going to read from The Wretched of the Earth, where he says, "The colonial world is a world cut in two. The dividing line, the frontiers, are shown by barracks and police stations. In the colonies, it is the policeman and the soldier who are the official, instituted go-betweens, the spokesman of the settler and his rule of oppression. In capital societies, the educational system, whether lay or clerical, is the structure of moral reflexes handed down from father to son. The exemplary honesty of workers who are given a medal after 50 years of good and loyal service to the company, and the affection which springs from harmonious relations and good behavior. All these aesthetic expressions of respect for the established order serve to create around the exploited person an atmosphere of submission and of inhibition, which lightens the task of policing considerably." Now, I bring this up because when we see these mass movements that are going on right now, we are starting to see people challenging these narratives. And that's an opening for a leftist project. We're not celebrating, obviously, police brutality, but what we're saying is that actually the people in power are much weaker than they would like to be. So we really need to be seizing on this opportunity, which is why the kind of failure that we've had to really rise to this moment is so dire. Because there's a lot of people who thought that this system was just going to collapse on itself, that we were going to have to do it. We're going to have to do it. And we need to be prepared that no matter how bad things get, even economically and politically, until working people unite together and create these kind of common bonds to rise up and build the future that we want, the state will just revert to its most brutal form, right? And that's something that none of us want. So the difference between the rich and the rest of us is becoming clear as ever. The difference between those who benefit from state power and the rest of us is becoming clear as day. And we need to continue seizing on that to, one, stand up against the repressive state apparatus in every way that we can, and then to also start attacking those institutions and ideas that perpetuate this system of exploitation that is capitalism.
Yeah, I like stressing the point that they don't want to be, picking people up in rental minivans, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think there's a part on the left that imagines we're just going to get beaten by some sort of force that we can never. Like, I don't know if this is conscious, but that's the way it's framed. Yeah. Like the omnipotence of reaction, basically. And I think, I think that is the thing people need to see. This is a weak and threatened system right now.
It's on its back foot.
Yeah, I also think there are a lot of people who right now have are opened. Like the empathy is high, the care is high, but there's no actual political ideology. It's just this crazy emotional roller coaster from propaganda to propaganda and meme to meme and identity politics. And it's kind of bridging the gap to kind of really explain on the left like what this project is, because I feel like we've been done such a disservice, and we've kind of gone this like stupid Bernie bro branding and like, oh, you're not in the real world. Like, it's not going to happen that way. And I feel like that was so much of Michael's thing. It's like, we can be strong, we can be cool, we can be powerful, we don't have to be delusional. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The majority is here, and there's a lot of people in the middle that need to wake up and see that. But I think there is an opening, because those people are marching. At least
I think Cori Bush's victory in St. Louis is a good sign of that, because a lot of those identity things that people like to use to obfuscate are canceled out there. And actually, here's an identity for you, a Ferguson activist, like, right?
Top identity.
Taking off a longtime incumbent. I mean, this is really, that's where the pay dirt is.
And I just wanted to add as one last note, I really love and highly suggest people read Phenom, but that example that he gives about the worker who receives a gold watch at the end of 50 years of working for a company, which means for 50 years this person was being exploited and their bosses were making incredible amounts of money off of their back, and then at the end they spent $100 buying this person a watch. That is also key to this system too, and just being able to have that kind of wider scope and understanding this, like, yes, the police beating people in the street is certainly a part of that system, but it's also the kind of nicer kind of soft version of this system as well that we need to be prepared to conceptualize and also target too.
Yeah.
Well, perfect.
So what I'm hearing, David, is that you don't think we can have $600 a week in added stimulus, because then people won't want to go to work. They're going to get paid more to stay home, and it's going to be a disaster.
By class, David means accounting class, and we have to take care of the budget.
And I couldn't agree more.
All right. We're ready to go to the interview with the best Dr. Drew.
I think we do the pitch first.
I was going to do a little one more, slightly less Debbie Downer aside. No, I guess like the one other thing I wanted to just kind of speak candidly about with the TMBS community was thank you for embracing me. Matt and David definitely embraced me, and so many of you have reached out to just welcome me and say you're happy I'm on the show, and so that means the world to me. This is kind of the one thing that I'm feeling some solace in, like a real call to action around. So thank you. I'll talk about this more, but very briefly, I kind of see my role on the show is just to continue to hold the space for all the amazing people Michael connected, to continue to be able to stay in touch and, be in contact. There's no other Michael Brooks. There will never be another Michael Brooks, but maybe 40 or 50 of the, brightest brains he's assembled from around the globe, and, most caring and compassionate, hardworking people can kind of approximate a Michael Frankenstein of sorts. I also, Michael really pushed me politically and taught me a lot politically. We went back and forth a lot. We debated a lot. He at turns wanted me to come on the show, but I enjoyed watching. And I want to learn more on my own and not be, I no longer can text Michael, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. I feel like I've maybe said this before, but I no longer can just be like, tell me what's up. What are you thinking? What's going on in Lebanon? I mean, this is a perfect example. normally I would get Michael's brain for like, 2 hours to myself to talk about what's happening on the streets in Beirut. So I no longer have that. So I have to really apply myself in areas that I took him for granted. So I'd like to, without changing like the knowledge and the kind of, great knowledge all the listeners already have. I would like to sort of be someone that sits here and, gets to learn about areas of foreign policy and the globe that I just kind of depended on Michael's brain for all the references and all the insight. So hopefully that's something other people are interested in. And, you continue to become patrons. That's how we are able to do this. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for supporting my brother's work when you did. He didn't have that many years to do it. And the fact that you were able to be patrons is the reason we have this work, is the reason we have what we got of Michael Brooks. So thank you to everyone who was a patron, is a patron, and continues to support our effort to forward this work and let his vision and work grow.
And I would just add too, you can do that at patreon.com/TMBS. It's really great to have all of y'all as our bosses so that we can continue to do the real work, have real conversations instead of chasing clicks on YouTube. I also wanted to add, people who aren't familiar, we have our website at tmbs.fm where we are selling merch. A lot of people have shown up and have bought merch recently. We'll have some more announcements on that. But those things are being processed and they are coming, just so people know, because of COVID and because of the amount of orders that we had. It's taking a little bit of time for everything to come together, but that is being done. So thank you again to everyone who supported us both on Patreon and through our website as well.
Last thing. If times are tight, please reach out. We'll figure out a rate. Don't feel like there's a financial barrier to entry to be part of this community. That's definitely not the case or the goal. So just
for sure,
message us and we'll figure something out.
All right, guys. Here we go with the interview with I like to call him Dr. Drew because there's a very heinous Dr. Drew that lit his career on fire with some bad coronavirus takes earlier this year. So now the slot for Dr. Drew is open, but Drew Mikhael. And I mean, we could have talked to him for longer than 45 minutes, but I'm glad he gave us the time he did. And we'll see you guys at the end of this interview. Welcome back to TMBS. With me jointly conducting this interview is Lisha Brooks and David Griscom. And with us is Dr. Drew Mikhael. He's a pracademic, a research fellow at Queen's University in Belfast. He's also a TMBS crew, and I was shocked to find out that he's only been on, his first episode was only last year on the illicit history of Hezbollah in their present role. That was on June 2nd. And then he joined us, the one I remember more vividly as recent was the anti-austerity unrest in Lebanon in November. We talked about that. And then again in January 7th for the Drew Mikhael completionists there. But Drew, today we're talking about Beirut. You've lived in Beirut. That's am I right there? But before we get into Beirut, we wanted to talk about Michael a little bit. I was surprised at how recent your relationship with Michael has been because, as when it happened, you were somebody who I, appreciated the messages from, and I felt like you were similarly close to him. So I guess any comments you would like to make?
I could easily turn this into a show about Michael. I think that you guys have done a wonderful tribute to him. It's been very hard because I think that in speaking about Michael, I didn't know him that long, but I think that it speaks to the character that he appreciated and my journey, my personal journey. I'm Irish, Northern Irish Lebanese, and I grew up between Belfast and Beirut. And what I do now as a pracademic is take the lessons learned from the academy and bring it into policy practice, so working with NGOs and governments in post-conflict and conflict societies. And I think that Michael recognized my passion and drive to try and help people on the ground because he similarly growing up hard in the 1980s had that passion to alleviate poverty and hunger for people. So automatically when we met in New York for the first time, even though we'd been talking for a couple of years prior to that, we actually had a dinner and a night out in 2018. We clicked automatically from that sort of spiritual passion perspective. And I think that, in suffering from the loss and trying to like make head of it was the fact that he had such passion for connection with people. He valued their journeys more than how many journal articles they might have published or whatever reputation they might have had. Were they speaking truth, speaking truth to power and honesty? And I think that I'm so happy you guys are going to continue the mission because it's very important to have that emotional intelligence. We often talked about emotional intelligence being the most important intelligence, that sense of empathy, that sense of compassion. And I guess, that's, a wonderful lasting legacy. And I have to say that lots of people have texted me to ask me to tell stories about Michael's life, even though they're very limited. Mm. And to know that and to sort of begin the fact that this time last year, he was sitting in the same spot I was trying to prepare a show that on the Tuesday, on the 12th, and because I was late to bring him to the airport. So, I miss him terribly, and especially in light of what happened last Tuesday, because if anyone was going to show solidarity to people who are suffering, Michael was going to be the first one to do so. So, yeah.
You brought up before we started that the picture of the wall. What's the wall in Ireland called? The Solidarity?
So it's the International Solidarity or the International Wall of Peace. So everyone comes and signs their name there. And whenever you take the tour of Belfast, and you guys are always welcome, and I will give you the tour personally, and we'll walk through it. There are large walls that separate a number of different Catholic and Protestant communities that is a hangover from our divided past in Belfast. And on one side of the wall, it's adorned with peace and message of solidarity from the international community or all those who visit. And I just snapped a candid photo of Michael when he was standing there. And it so happens to be on this exact date 1 year ago as well. So it's in reflecting when Lisha told me that you guys wanted to talk about this, I just wanted to check when that date was because I had a feeling it was about this time. And serendipity has, I guess, brought us together.
Michael loved that wall so much, and he had recently, there it is. He had recently forwarded me a picture that there was a George Floyd mural on that wall, and he loved that it was such a global wall of solidarity. And I have a bit of a mission to try and get some murals of Michael up around the world. So putting it out into the ether.
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that is, I mean, our impact is what we leave behind in terms of how we touch people's lives. And I think that I could live until I'm 3, Michael and I are only, because it was my birthday 3 days later after his death. And obviously it was not a birthday to celebrate, but we were only separated. We're the same age. And I could live for triple the amount that he had on this earth. And I can't even hope to make the impact that he did and touch the people he did. And that was a constant inspiration, and it will be a constant inspiration going forward. And, it's so hard to countenance that with the loss of character because he was such a great guy to confide in problems and talk about issues. And I remember, I was having real problems with my job, and it was coming to a very, very hard point for me. And he called straight away. And I really appreciated the fact that he always made time for the person before anything else in terms of what they were doing. Yeah. So again, my condolences and my love and my thoughts are always with you guys and who knew him best and worked with him every day. And lived with him. Well.
Oh, Matt, you're muted. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Matt.
I was just say one of the things that I found solace in was all the connections he gave us to people like you. So, I appreciate the words. But Lisha, you want to ask about let's get to the subject at hand now.
I'm I'm curious about Beirut. No. No, that's beautiful what you just said, Matt. I really echo that. Getting to connect with all of Michael's people and you guys graciously kind of including me on this new iteration of the show is kind of the only thing that's giving me any kind of solace or escape. So thank you. And then speaking of tremendous suffering and upheaval, I was saying earlier to Matt and David, one of the many, many things that I just depended on my brother for was his encyclopedic brain of foreign policy and all things Middle Eastern, all things on the continent. I could just refer to him if I had a question. So I just kind of wanted to ask you to set the stage of what's happened. You sent me so many brilliant articles and videos, and I've kind of been immersed in learning a lot about what's been going on in Lebanon and Beirut. But I was just curious if you would kind of tee up what the last 10 months have been like and kind of what's led to this explosion and these, rising up acts of solidarity and resistance in the streets.
Sure. So, first of all, I have to say again, what attracted me to Michael was his cosmopolitan attitude and the fact that he saw international struggle as a global struggle connected between all peoples. And I think that to begin speaking about the Middle East generally and to speak about Lebanon in particular, we have to go at least back 10 months. We can go further. We could go back 100 years. We could go back even longer. But for brevity's sake, we'll start.
I think for today, we might need to do 10 months.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the lecturer in me might go on, but I will keep it concise. In October...
and we'll continue having these conversations.
For sure. And anytime you need, just let any book recommended readings on Middle East, please. But so in October 2019, the Lebanese took to the streets in what was probably the most congruent between Lebanon is a social mosaic made up of 18 recognized ethno-sectarian or confessional groups. And for the history of Lebanon, its independence, it has employed a power-sharing system between the three major sects, Sunni, Shia, and Maronite. This way, this power-sharing logic was a means of sharing public office, having proportional representation, and ethnic veto rights and cultural rights as well. The reason why they had that was because there was a coalescence and a difference of ethnic identities in regards to how they viewed the state and where the state should be ethnically either Arab or more Western orientated. This eventually exploded into a conflict, a 15-year conflict from 1975 to 1990, in which 200,000 people lost their lives. This is a very abridged version of Lebanon. At the end of that conflict, we had a Syrian imposed peace agreement called the Ta'if Agreement, which was a reimposition of power-sharing logic. However, under the Assad regime, it became very, very dominant and skewed for certain political actors. And in the period from 1990 to 2005, under Syrian essential authoritarianship, using local Lebanese proxies who were once warlords during the civil conflict embedded themselves and captured the state institutions, effectively creating systemic corruption not only at the top, but all throughout the system. It's a very, very common thing to note, if anyone who has been in Lebanon, just how deep the corruption goes. And that starts from the top, because those states, those political parties, whenever they become powerful or they become into parliament or into government, in the institutions, they embed their cronies in everything from public health system, in the public and in the private sphere, and throughout banking and through any sector you can get public transport, you can conceivably think each political party and politicians, major politician, Zaim in the Arabic term, which means political leader, has their grubby little fingers. So the entire state becomes what we call captured. And to replicate their power, they create, they institutionalize sectarianism. So to ensure that they are continued to be put into power and voted for into power in the elections, they continue to replicate their power by saying that they are needed as defenders of one of the particular 18 communities, that they are there to protect them from the other. So if I'm a Maronite, I'm protecting you from a Shia or a Sunni. Or if I'm a Sunni, I'm protecting you from a Shia. And it's very, very easy to instrumentalize these divisions, because in a region as unstable as the Middle East and the Levant, whenever your borders are Syria and your other border is Israel, and your wider regional dynamic is the Saudi-Iranian axis, it's very instrumentalized those wider conflicts into the Lebanese sphere, because of you have wider ethnic groups that actually map on to those different countries as well.
Sure.
So, any questions? Sorry, no, all good.
No.
So that's the brief abridged.
No, it's helpful. It's great.
Okay, in the years since the end of the civil war, since 1990, in 2005, the Syrian regime murdered the former prime minister Rafik Hariri, which led to Lebanon's first real large popular mobilization called the Cedar Revolution, or the Independence Intifada, which led to the Syrian military apparatus leaving. At this point, there was quite a lot of hope around Lebanon's finally being able to finally control its own destiny from some 500 years under Ottoman rule, to then the French Mandate, to then effective war economy and warlordship, to finally being independent from Syria. And then, of course, Israel pulled out in the year 2000. So finally, the country within its own borders technically had sovereignty. However, what we saw was the continued state capture of the major political leaders, because in successive years after 2005, a number of conflicts, Israel in 2006. On the streets, Hezbollah came in and repressed political rivals in the streets of Beirut. And then it continued into the Syrian civil war, which then became a very easy way to instrumentalize fears, confessional and sectarian ethnic fears in the ground, because Lebanon at one point hosted 1.5 million Syrian refugees. And in the Lebanese context, because of the social mosaic, there's always a delicate sectarian balance to be had in the power sharing system. Right. So whenever you have 1.5 million Syrian refugees, some very prominent Christian leadership would say, oh, this is a great danger to our own personal sectarian group or our sect.
We know nothing about that in the U.S. It doesn't happen here.
No. There's no instrumentalization.
No fear-mongering around refugee crises.
So one of the ways I've been describing how people have asked me over the last week when I've been doing appearances like this, how do you describe the systemic corruption? How do you pick out, are there particular faces? And I say it's like systemic racism. It's embedded in the system itself. Okay, there are people that represent the system and proliferate and help proliferate it and help replicate it for their own benefit, but it is endemic. It is the system itself. So now, after 2005 and after the Syrian civil war, what we had was growing austerity in Lebanon that led to eventually the Lebanese purse strings of the average citizen being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed to the point in 2019, a tax was levied on WhatsApp. So you would have to pay a tax on WhatsApp. So this led to a mass mobilization that was not about WhatsApp, but it was about the wider corruption of not just individual leaders, but all the leadership together. So in the Arabic term, there's killon yani killon, which means all. And what was important about the October 29 revolution, whereas previously there had been sparks of revolution or popular uprising, they often coincided with the prevailing sectarian or ethnic dissent or the wider ethnic politics. What happened in 2019 was in Beirut, amongst the middle class, in Tripoli in the north, in the major cities, you had all the different ethnic groups coming out in one voice and showing and expressing solidarity with all the protests, because everyone suffered from the systemic corruption and now had to suffer from the austerity measures that were put in place because of the criminal mismanagement of the entire elite class, including Hezbollah, including the major Christian organizations, including the major Sunni organizations, and all the other different ethnic groups after that. So, 2019, October Revolution, we had the government resign. The government at that time decided to, after a little bit of holdout, resign, because that was one of the calls of the people on the street. There was many different competing calls about what should happen, but that was a central one, along with elections to come afterwards. So when that happened, we move into the new year, and the government is announced under a prime minister called Hassan Diab. And Hassan Diab and his government, mostly trying to appease the protesters on the street, who calls for a technocratic government. What that means, I know that on TMBS we have like an issue with the word technocratic, and fair enough, and I do agree. Yeah. But in the Lebanese context, it means something different. It means those who are not attached to a sectarian leadership and will not promote sectarian division in the government. So whenever they look for whenever the technocratic government was asked for by the street, it meant basically people who deserve to be in their jobs, not just applying to a sectarian head count. So since that period in January, unfortunately, and speaking personally as a means to express the destitution and despondency of how Lebanese people have treated this 2020, like we all have, was that inflation of the Lebanese lira has gone up to 85%. So the purchasing power of the average Lebanese citizen has been completely decimated. Without getting new Lebanese or US dollars into the country, people's bank accounts have turned into worthless money. So their savings have completely drained. 40% unemployment, and the near collapse and probable soon collapse of the healthcare system and the education system in the preceding months since the announcement of COVID. And the government, this government of technocrats, has not been able to negotiate a rescue package from the IMF. One of the reasons why is because of internal Lebanese, well, not one of, the main reason why is because internally Lebanese elites, this ruling class, this regime, kleptomaniac, sociopathic regime, has not been able to agree on the political reforms, largely fair political reforms, and being mindful of like neo-liberal, neo-colonial like institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, but largely fair political reforms, like control the port being given up to control to the Lebanese state rather than Hezbollah. The Lebanese government rejected these and has not been able to negotiate the rescue package that would save the tanking Lebanese economy. Right. And so the Lebanese people have become incredibly destitute. So then fast forward into August 4th, and the explosion that happened in Beirut, nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate left for nearly 7 years to degrade on the port of Lebanon. And rather than in the brief history that I've given you of Lebanon, where the sectarian elite would point their fingers at the decline of the state at other sectarian groups, or Israel, or Syria, or the refugees, Syrian or Palestinian, or any of the refugees that have come in, or Iran, or Saudi, or the US, or Britain, or France, they had no one to blame. There was no one else to blame but themselves. Their criminal negligence and lack of care had left a ticking time bomb on the port of Beirut, which the flat I used to live in completely overlooks, which it is deeply, is very, very well connected to the city. And it's only by miracle the fact that COVID was around that we haven't seen more than the announced 220 deaths. So what you have seen from the Lebanese in reaction to this was a follow-on from 10 months ago, which we already had the first popular uprising, or first cross-sectarian popular uprising throughout the country. And rather than at that time, there was a lot of joy and a lot of celebration and a lot of meme making and a lot of wonderful like expression of Lebanese creativity. You have seen nothing but rage, deservedly so. Something that I feel, even speaking about it now and speaking about it before, especially as a diaspora and someone who has lived in the city and who desperately wants to be there to try and clean up the rubble and to try and help get people out from underneath buildings. Because in the aftermath, the Lebanese state did nothing. Private citizens went and cleared the streets. Private citizens are still clearing the streets. Private citizens are still trying to search for the some over 150 people that are considered missing. And in this point, the mask, or as Michael used to say, the ball has been shown. And it has been shown for a long time, something that we all knew. But at this point, it has become completely unlivable. People are being constricted, of being robbed of not only of their life savings, but of any kind of dream of creating a better life and future. So with this bomb, and I'm calling it a bomb because criminal negligence, I consider it absolutely, this is not an accident. Because whenever I lived in the city, and anyone who would tell you who lives in Beirut will tell you it's a deeply unsafe city due to the fact that corruption is the system. People are paid off, and you are like building code violations, sidewalks, electricity. 30 years after the war is still not. At the moment, because of the austerity, we have barely any electricity throughout the country. The complete infrastructure collapse lies at the feet of this political class. So what you have now, and since the protest started on Saturday, was a visceral reaction to the decades-long mismanagement and the discord that the entire Lebanese political elite have sown inside the country.
Some news today, Prime Minister Hassan Diab, I don't know if that is the pronunciation, announces his cabinet's resignation. Do you want to comment on that?
So, in October 2019, we saw the cabinet hold out the Prime Minister, Saad Hariri, Rafiq's son, and that's a common feature in Lebanese politics, the sons and their feudal dynasties, a lot of them, held on for a couple of weeks. Because Lebanese politicians are used to riding the wave. They're excellent at brinksmanship, and they're excellent at managing crisis. So they thought they'd try to hold on. Eventually they saw that the protests in 2019 were sustainable and were not going away. They eventually sacrificed the government to say, we will form a government that will work for you. And as you said today, it's announced that they are gone. Now, this, unlike the last time, there's not an appetite on the ground to just stop there. Because the fact is that a government of technocrats, no matter how capable and how wonderful and well-meaning they are, means nothing in the Lebanese context without uprooting and getting rid of the larger confessional leaders who have embedded their cronies all throughout the public and private system, in the central bank, in the different infrastructural systems that I've highlighted before. So we need to go further. There is a need to really, really attack the deep state, or another term, or at least attack a lot of the scions who have upheld the system for their own enrichment.
I wanted to ask you about this, and just so people can have like a little bit stronger understanding about how deep this corruption is in the country. I was reading some statistics about about Lebanon, and finding some like very frightening numbers. Something like 70% of bank deposits are lent to the state, and that's a massive jump just since 2015. The most recent debt to GDP ratio that I could find, which I feel like they're even having a very difficult time recently being able to calculate that, as you can imagine, with the contraction, it was 170% a GDP to sovereign debt ratio. So when we're talking about the corruption, we're not just talking about people skimming a little bit off the top. We're talking about them being unable to make the payments to, have a state function, to provide basic social services, and then going in massive debt to, try to function on some basic level.
Right. 100%. 100%, Dave. That's exactly that. It's not just, it's an entire Ponzi scheme set up so those at the top of the confessional ladder can enrich themselves more thoroughly. And they've used the state coffers and the state institutions to funnel money directly into themselves. Another example, and maybe talking about the political example, is that there's a state apparatus called the Council of the South. So after the Israeli pullout in 2000, we saw a lot of reconstruction that needed to happen in southern Lebanon because occupation of Israel was quite brutal. There was a lot of back and forth between different players, and a lot of the infrastructure was gone. Nabir Berri, who's been the Speaker of the House since the end of the Civil War, is a Shia and is from the South. And in his rhetoric or in his ability as a leader to replicate his own power, has claimed the Council of the South as something that he has been able to grant the Shia specifically, despite the fact that it is a state functioning and public monetary apparatus. This is nothing to do with something that he's been able to manage, but is actually something embedded in the state. Mm-hmm. So the corruption and the economy of that roll together. The state public functions is massively bloated and overextended. In the Lebanese constitution, there are about 30 or so jobs that require parliamentary approval due to this, to keep sectarian balance. Mm-hmm. But what happens in the corruption in Lebanon that crosses over with the political economy that you pointed out is that these get extended by informal law. So despite the fact that it's only mandated constitutionally that there are a number of head positions like head of the army, head of the police force, etc., they extend it down to all public institutions. So a public hospital, a public university, and they get into a horse trading scenario in which political leaders will weigh up what advantages it is to put a particular person in a particular role. And if some particular leader managed to, they got the public hospital in this area, that means it's someone else's turn. And there's usually a lot of institutional backlog and a lot of problems that cause from the delay in confirming these posts. But then you confirm sectarian and confessional leadership that is directly responsible to their particular patrons higher up the food chain. Mm-hmm. And then, as we see, this is how we embed. This is how the state gets captured in its entirety.
Right. So speaking of the food chain, what's going on? You know, there's been such abuse from the police and the military on the citizens. Who's making those calls? Who's like, what is the structure now in this like police state without government?
That's a really, really insightful and very good question. And and it's just a little bit of unpacking is that in a state as delineated, and hopefully I caricatured it in a way that sort of makes this next step easier to understand, is that there are 11 different security apparatuses in Lebanon, and a lot of them have issues with stepping on each other's overlapping mandates. And one of the reasons why there's 11 is that each confessional leadership and each sect usually seeks to try and in place different people who might be loyal to them in different sections. So, for example, you had an assassination of a particular special investigator in the Lebanese police in the early years of the Syrian civil war. This was considered because he was someone who was close to the major Sunni party, and he was possibly someone who was investigating and coming up and running up against Hezbollah's narrative in the country. So what you see is quite a lot of diffusion between different security apparatuses. One particular one, and one that's prominent for the protests, was the parliamentary police. The parliamentary police is ostensibly under the remit of the overall police, the ISF in Lebanon. However, for the longest period of time, it has been objective fact on the ground in Lebanon that, again, Nabil Berri, the Speaker of the House, has for a number of years placed his own people within the parliamentary police as a matter of that political conceptual or confessional horse trading. So you see quite a lot of difference in opinions and difference of approach and tactics. It's unfair to just simply say the entire Lebanese army, because there were instances and particular commanders who made decisions on the ground at the protest not to intervene or not to come in with repressive tactics. However, speaking as a academic and stepping back from objectivity a little bit, we saw as soon as the protesters showed up, they were rained down with tear gas from the very start, before any kind of vandalization or any kind of ostensive reason to create repressive crowd control, to impose repressive crowd control order. They began with tear gas, which says that, I think, my reading of the situation, and maybe it's slightly abstract, is that this regime, this political regime, is trying to protect itself. They understand that you can't just get away with having the city explode. from your criminal negligence without massive amount of anger. So they're not going to play the game of, okay, well, let's blame the other sect, because they can't do that. So what we have to do now is just repress them into submission. And that's where I think that we have seen a number of protesters. Some protesters have been kidnapped by some of the thugs close to the president. There's been a number of people who went missing. There have been a number of people that happened under the state security forces in October 2019, people being killed in custody. So despite the fact that Lebanon has always had this, certainly in comparison to its neighbors, a lot freer expression, there is very, very serious dangers of that being closed down. And I fear that that might be the case going forward.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just sort of hoping that, you might be able to sort of hit on how important Beirut is to the entire country of Lebanon. I think some people might not be a little unfamiliar with like the geography. I know, from my understanding too, like the port of Beirut obviously is very important to the city and to the country's economy. But even that is almost like, there's a lot of focus on that because there are so many factions that have control over shipping, and they're able to excise taxes and things like that. The other areas of the country that, you could also have more vibrant ports, like, Tripoli, for example, have been pretty neglected. So if you could just give folks like a good understanding of sort of geographically and politically, economically, how important Beirut is to the system.
Well, I mean, effectively you have around about, and we haven't had a census since 1932 because of those confessional mosaic issues and the sectarian equilibrium. But estimating there's a 4.5 million population of Lebanon, not including refugees. Approximately half live in Beirut. Beirut is also housing, is a very vibrant international city. English is widely spoken. Throughout the Civil War and before the Civil War and after the Civil War, there used to be the old trope that Lebanon or Beirut was the Paris of the Middle East, that it was the center hub of Gulf state tourists or anyone who wanted to let their hair down for the weekend. It's known as a party capital, okay, for good reason. It's earned its reputation in that regard. So not only is it absolutely the economic center point, and you're right to point out Tripoli, and Tripoli is one of the most economically underdeveloped places in the Middle East, despite the fact that it has access to a port, despite the fact that it's a city of around 1 million, despite the fact that 9 billionaires come from that city. It has been significantly neglected because one of the Rafiq Hariri, one of the deals that he brought to Lebanon was a regeneration of the downtown. So what you saw was significant outside investment, particularly from the Gulf, to reinvest in Beirut's downtown because they wanted their plaything back, essentially. And then so Beirut ends up being a complete juxtaposition in terms of really, really destitute areas with slums and actual more formalized refugee camps, or people who have been refugees who have set up permanent settlements, who have taken, unfortunately, the brunt of this explosion because a lot of them were down by the port. Alongside high-rise, soulless buildings that do not pay any kind of attention to Beirut's cultural history or architectural history, that are completely unaffordable to anyone but millionaires, who are usually outside investors. So while Lebanon was supposedly in those early years after 1990 had this miracle comeback, and there was a lot of poetic articles written in Western magazines about the miracle of Beirut rising, a phoenix rising from the ashes, it only served a few. It always did. And those few Lebanese actors enriched themselves through the outside investment in the city. So yeah, it's very important economically. And now after the blast, we have an estimated 15 billion worth of damage in the downtown area for a country that it was already completely tanked economically. And who has to pay for who is going to pay for this?
Wow. I have kind of like a more kind of final wrap up question, but David or Matt, if you have more, I don't want to jump to that.
Oh, the only question I wanted to ask sort of towards the end is the French role, because we've now seen, Macron show back up, quite triumphantly. And there's been, I'd be curious to hear, what your read on the kind of, general population's feelings toward Macron, and if it seems like France is really trying to reassert itself as like a force of stability in a government that's in such, free fall.
Right. Yeah, Matt, that looked like your question as well. So
yeah,
I think it's a really important question, because it's ahistorical to consider Lebanon without considering the role of outside actors. And I don't want to go too far into history, but in 1860, when effectively the modern border of Lebanon, well, maybe not the modern border, but the modern creation of its governing system of power sharing was guaranteed by Britain and France at that time, who were protecting particular confessional actors inside of Lebanon. This meant that throughout Lebanon's history, it has always intersected along with what was happening regionally and internationally. France, of course, under Sykes-Picot, were mandated Lebanon. Sykes-Picot in 1960, the agreement between the British and French to drop the Middle East post the First World War, where Britain got Palestine. So under the French mandate, which left in 1943, which the Lebanese jointly created a power sharing pact to get rid and get independence, Lebanon has always been intersected with what is happening outside of it. And its local actors have always sought that international protection as a means of propping themselves up. Unfortunately, now there's two things I think about Macron's visit. One, very well timed, because whenever the bar is so low for your governance, where you don't expect the people who govern you, who you have voted in, to literally not set thousands of tons of worth of explosives right beside your port, anything seems better than this. So I don't know if you caught it, but there was a petition, I hope mostly in glib, to reestablish the mandate, to ask for colonialism back from France. I do think that, now I know that we all, as anti-imperialists and anti-colonialists, will massively have a visceral reaction against that. But it speaks to the desperation of the current governments, that people are asking for anything. I'll say Paris is better than Beirut, at least if we can have that. However, if we look at the history of the country, we initially came together in divided confessional groups to get rid of the French in the first place. Outside actors have not always played the role of international fair arbiters in a region that is laden with natural gas, oil, different allies, and different regional and conflicts. There will always be a wider forces at work that international actors will seek to use Lebanon in the greater balance of power. So it's about time, I feel, that not to throw ourselves upon the aid of and goodwill of international actors, but to learn to actually govern ourselves in spite of, or using them to aid our international recovery. Because no matter what way we slice it, Lebanon economically is going to need outside help to rebuild and to reshape its economy. But it's better that we do that while we govern ourselves and not seek to reinstate colonialism. And I will say one more thing that's an important point, confessionally, is that the Shia under, not the Shia as a whole, because that's very myopic to say, but under Hezbollah has always had a close relationship with Iran. So simply, if we're setting the bar so low that France is going to do a better job than our current governors, I would make the argument that Saudi, the Sunni part, the major Sunni party, which has been close to Saudi would also do a better job than governing Lebanon than the Lebanese. Iran probably would, but we don't want that either. Right. And the fact is that historically the French have always been the protectorate of the largest confessional group, the Christian confessional group, the Maronites. And we don't want to undo this cross-sectarian or cross-sect movement that we have currently in Lebanon. I would rather that we all unite and realize that we have to govern ourselves fairly. And whatever rules we have for international actors is decided by ourselves and not on the basis of the fact that we may be afraid of Iran or Saudi or France becoming in and imposing their rule in Lebanon.
Yeah, and speaking to the necessity of outside help, do you have any place you would direct people? I do want to shout out the Beirut Banyan, who I was alerted to by your appearance on the show. They've been doing a lot of good programming about this, but anybody you would like to shout out or groups?
Yeah, I would say that I can email you the entire list because I know everyone's going to have different interests, whether or not it's child protection or refugee protection, and really Lebanon's settling in for a very long fight, a very, very long fight. And we're going to need all the help we can get. I have donated to a couple of different charities that have been close to my heart and that I've worked with. I've also donated to an organization called Impact Lebanon. Impact Lebanon is like a coalescing organization that also then attracts the money and dishes it out to different actors. But Red Cross, there's literally so many. I have a list and we can make it available to the TMBS crew that is certified that they go directly to the NGOs and not funneled through the government. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you want to donate generally, I would look at Impact Lebanon. But I'm sure that there are other charities that will speak to people a lot more. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We had a bit of group think. I was going to ask you who is primed for power, but David cut to the chase with the special visitor from France hopping in. And yeah, I feel like I've had this major loss in my life, and then you think this magnitude of suffering, people have lost entire families, homes, businesses, it's kind of just, as any human being with compassion on this earth, to not have your heart be with everyone who's suffering on the ground there and not want to do everything you can to stand in solidarity and be for part of this fight now and for the long run, there'd have to be something pretty wrong with you from where I'm standing. So thank you for that history and for, I learned so much. And also please send us that full list and we'll absolutely spread that. And you mentioned, I think before we were recording, that members of the TMBS community had already contacted you about donating. And that makes me smile. I think that's so beautiful that the community my brother built is just, really, really solid people. So thank you for telling us that. Absolutely. No. I mean, this is something that, it tugged at the heartstrings a little bit as, it's been an emotional 3 weeks, obviously. And to see, his collaborators, his friends, you guys all retweeting the places as well was really important to me because Michael brought us together. He brought all of us together, the collaborators, on the basis of what you just said, Lisha, which is compassion and solidarity and understanding human suffering, regardless of whether or not, you call yourself a different ethno-religious or national group. We all suffer from these issues. And it's important that either we stand together as one or we'll fall as individuals. And that's why it's so important. I'm so happy to see you guys continue the work. I love you all for it. Anytime you need anything, let me know and I'm there. I'll come running. I can't wait to come to Belfast.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks. Yeah, I'm proud of that for our first joint interview. Drew's great.
Absolutely.
Oh, you're muted, David.
No, I was just saying he's great. That was a great interview.
I felt like most of the questions we were on the same pages, but I have to admit I did not write down David's question about the economics and the port and the banks. So.
Oh yeah, we got the economic portion going on there.
I was like, yep, I thought, nope, when I went there.
Full spine on the enemy and the FT.
Yeah,
exactly. It's important. So David, you want to give us our economic minute for tonight, or is that where we're going?
Yeah, I guess we could still call it the gem. I want to keep in line with a lot of things that we've been covering, but also making sure that we're continuing to try to build the international union and labor movements. I wanted to highlight a really important story that affects all of us as Americans, especially as consumers, about what's going on with the supply chains when it comes to many of the garments and clothing that people are wearing. So this is the lead from a story in Reuters Asia. Garment workers supplying global fashion brands have been underpaid or not paid at all during the coronavirus crisis, with lost wages potentially amounting to nearly $6 billion. And now, these kind of workers already are living on poverty pay. Their wages are already insufficient to survive. And now people have basically seen their wages cut, or they're actually not receiving them at all. And the source of this information study comes from a group called Clean Clothes Campaign, which is a group of labor rights organizations as well as unions. And there's a lot of really important international labor unions that have been really focused on trying to build up labor organizations in parts of the world in South and Southeast Asia, where a lot of the clothing that are consumed in fast fashion, things like H&M, are produced. And so just to give you a couple of the numbers, so it's estimated that around 3.19 billion to 5.79 billion wages have been lost by these workers. Basically, it's just been unpaid. The work's been done, but people aren't getting paid for the work that they're doing. And just in Bangladesh alone, it's estimated to be around 500 billion and around 400 million in Indonesia. And these are limited studies because they can't obviously get all of the information for all of the countries that are involved, in this global supply chain. But they are very harrowing, and we can expect that this is also happening in other countries that basically is being unreported. In Cambodia alone, workers lost 33% of their normal wages through March through May. And on top of how frustrating and damaging this is for all those people, we also have to remember that millions of garment workers are not formally employed, right? They're informally employed and they don't have contracts. Reuters also reported on workers who were fired by text message after they had protests against their unpaid wages. And just to give you some of the names, Vogue reported as well that Michael Kors, Tory Burch, and Kate Spade are among brands linked to 9 factories that have targeted over around 5,000 union members with unfair dismissals. So this is something that we have to remember that, one, this is the global crisis, COVID, and it sort of, there is a cascading effect on this all the way down the supply chain. And these massive international corporations are gunning for the fact that most people just aren't going to pay attention to the massively unfair labor standards, and now the unfair and cruel and evil and wicked practice of not paying people in the midst of a pandemic. I'd also add, too, that not only are we highly connected to these workers in the United States, but we should also understand that so much of global growth in GDP has been tied to the continuing of moving this kind of labor further and further into periphery states where there are less labor laws, less attention, so that they can hyper exploit people and get away with inhumane conditions, unfair pay, and now union busting and not paying people in the midst of a pandemic. So there's something that, definitely trying to stand with international labor organization support groups like the Clean Clothes Campaign as they try to fight forward. And there's a lot of really important studies and work that I hope that we're going to be able to cover in the next few months about actually these global supply chains and the sweatshop transitions that we've started to see across the globe, because they are really fundamental to this capitalist system. And we are highly connected to them, and we have a lot of power to start pushing back and in solidarity with people around the globe.
Thank you so much.
No, of course.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that was something I kind of flagged at the beginning of quarantine and lockdown. And then it's like, there's so many atrocities happening. Mm-hmm. It's easy, it's like we're overwhelmed. So thank you for kind of bringing it back to that story and reminding us that the suffering's ongoing.
You can only imagine how bad it is across the world when you see how bad it is here and how brutal it is. I mean, even from the very beginning, I was pretty radicalized before this whole coronavirus thing.
Oh, really?
But to see people you love be told to go into work weeks past when it's not safe, mm-hmm. and then to be later laid off and then fired by that same employer is just, it's very infuriating. And there's so much pain going on across like the world because of this, and because of this, and not just because of the virus, but also because of the system that people are trapped in, that where they have to, I don't know, it's breaks my heart, really.
Yeah. And also just noting too that, these people who are being unjustly fired, they were just asking to get paid for the work that they've already done. And just like that kind of level of cruelty and inhumanity, it's just unprecedented. But are we ready for the news of the day?
I thought you said the nudes of the day. I was like, oh, you guys did not run this by me, but
That'd be a
I'll
little
go
bit
with
more
you.
exciting.
Yes, I'm ready for both
Well,
the nudes or the news of the day.
after a long search, it seems that Joe Biden has settled on America's favorite comp, Kamala Harris, to be his vice president. uh,
I'm just picturing Joe Biden searching for his newspaper for hours throughout his house. But yes, he also found a cop.
It's hard to call her America's favorite anything after how she campaigned. I mean,
I know. Somebody with almost no support or enthusiasm, except for a very vocal and very scary group of folks, K-Hive, which I'm excited to bump into.
Okay. Well, we need to address the K-Hive because that's what makes this a smart choice. Because look, Biden has people have been commenting they've never seen like a Biden supporter in the real world. But guess what? We don't have to go in the real world because there's a pandemic. So you just need the digital sort of foot soldiers. And the easiest and the only person that Biden could have selected that would have him such a group of psychos that are ready to harass journalists and keep them in line, that's what politics is going to be. That's what it was important for Bernie. We did a lot in the battles. Came up short, but the posting is important. So I think the K-Hive is going to be a big asset to Joe Biden.
On like a slightly, I don't know, one thing that I just keep thinking about is I know a lot of people are, I see on social media who are so excited, for this historic pick. And it honestly just makes me really sad that the bar of like what we need as a society and what we need as people has just like been distilled to like these small identity politic victories. Like it's honestly really soul crushing. I mean, we can definitely like make fun and battle and, point out what's wrong, but it's also just like the fact that that's bringing people joy when like so many people's needs aren't going to be met is.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially in the context of talking about Lebanon and sectarian power
Right.
sharing agreements that are, you see the limits of that sort of thing.
Well,
Right.
I think it's important to note, though, as funny as this is, and I'm sure we'll all have like a field day over the next couple of months watching them try to square, for example, Kamala Harris walking back her very strong, I thought, well done accusations against Joe Biden for his support of,
She believes women.
Yeah, well, for that, and then also for Joe Biden's, material support for segregationists, it's gonna be really interesting to walk that back. But I mean, it really is such a great example of what the Democratic Party is, what what the actual people in control of that party, what they believe. I mean, it's symbolic nonsense, and then at the same time supporting people who, in the moment when there's this massive Black Lives Matter protests going on, supporting somebody who spent their entire life, essentially in law enforcement, supporting somebody who worked so hard to protect the rich and powerful in California. I mean, it's exactly the kind of thing that, that they've been wanting to do for a long time, which is no substance, all symbol, right? And that's exactly what the Democratic Party has been and is certainly becoming in this era, which is very, something we need to be really prepared for dealing with.
Yeah, it did. Did Kamala ever really like reckon with that, with what she had to do to, advance in the line of work that she advanced in?
Well, with her prosecutor record?
Yeah. I don't remember her doing that seriously at all.
I mean, there's some good videos. We will definitely have to mine the archives that we were pulling during the campaign of her essentially defend. I mean, I remember when she was complaining against people who were using the slogan, less jails, more schools.
Yeah.
And she was lampooning people for making this very basic human, argument. And then the kicker of her argument was that, yeah, well, you're going to be happy that we're arresting people when somebody, is trying to get into your door, right? When somebody is like at your front door trying to invade your house. I mean, the most conservative, fear-mongering, right-wing, dangerous kind of ideology is not something that not only did she participate in, but she actually was using as her excuse for her participation.
Right, exactly. And that was really a response to the that was the early version of the defund stuff and abolish.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the same as probably from the abolished community or tangential to the schools and jails trade-off. That's the moment we're living in now. That's completely blown up, and it's just going to be her. I mean, I don't know how big of a deal it is in the grand scheme of things. I think it's definitely safer than Susan Rice. It gives the right wing a lot more or a lot less to deal with. Warren, didn't work out for her so much.
I think it still will, unfortunately.
In which way?
Don't you think she'll get a cabinet position?
We'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah, it's depressing, and I wish we had Michael's humor and routines right now, because it's definitely like, we got to do this thing. The alternative is much more catastrophic, but it's pretty joyless.
Do we have some of these tweets, Matt, that are in the outline?
Oh yeah, I'll pull them up.
Because there's some really fun ones here, just sort of taking us back through some of Kamala's proudest moments. If you go in order, I can set up, this first one, which it's been amazing to see her try to walk back, her real slam on Joe Biden for, his support of segregation. Remember when she said, I was that girl. I remember when she was on Colbert's show and she said, well, it was a debate, right? Which completely undermines her point, right? If you're saying like, nothing I'm saying during these debates has any conviction or weight behind them. But do we have this first one?
Yeah, here it is.
Because not only was this a crucial moment in her political campaign, but this was something that she definitely was really trying to run on for a while. She even this is a tweet from Frank Ocean Hafiz. She even put her Biden segregation takedown on a T-shirt.
Oh no!
LOL.
Which is pretty incredible, right?
And the fact this hasn't been taken down is
Wait,
also LOL.
she walked it back basically immediately, I thought. That's remarkable.
So that one's pretty amazing. But if we have these other ones up too, I'm excited that we'll be able to see the kind of visionary leadership that is so needed for times like this, when what we really need are clear policies to address the inequities, the class inequities, and the racial inequities of this country. We really need policies that are going to be able to speak to everybody. And this is one of my favorite Kamala Harris's plans for the campaign. Yesterday, I announced that as president, I'll establish a student loan debt forgiveness program for Pell Grant recipients who start a business that operates for 3 years in disadvantaged communities.
Nailed it.
Oh my God.
Genius.
It's so good. Classic stuff like that. And I wish we had the video for this. I'm sure someone else can get this, but I think one of the funniest things about Kamala Harris, and we're going to get a lot of it, is her pandering. Because I will say Kamala Harris, compared to a lot of the other politicians, she at least, she can speak, she can be on camera, right? She's like, for retail politicians, she's a lot better than
Exactly. I mean, that's why the Dems have such a short bench that she can do that stuff. I mean, I don't even think she does it well, but I think she does it, okay. She gets a C+. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think it's weird. She laughs at very, inappropriate moments, like when she's talking about locking up or threatening to lock up parents of truant children.
Oh God, I forgot about that.
Period.
And she does a few moments like that where she's addressing pretty iffy things and she laughs, and it's like, come on, let's tone that back a little bit. But nonetheless, Democrat Party is, they're freaks. So Kamala is a person that seems like a normal person that looks nice on a ABC morning show, and that's what they need.
Mm-hmm. And this last one that we had up, the tweet, was about when she was, it's just a text. I figure Plata might get us into a little bit of trouble, but when she was on the Breakfast Club, I believe, and she was talking about how, in college, she used to love smoking weed and listening to Tupac and Snoop Dogg. This is her direct quote. She says, I have and I did inhale, talking about smoking marijuana. It was a long time ago, but yes, I just broke the news. It was during college. And what was she playing in the background? Oh, yeah. Definitely Snoop Dogg, Tupac for sure. And if you go back to the tweet, if you go back to the tweet, oh yeah, it's right there. Sorry, Tupac's first album came out in 1991. Snoop's first album came out in 1993. Kamala Harris graduated college in 1986. So either she was smoking some really great weed that transported her, 6-7 years into the future, or she's just full of shit, which I think is more likely.
Oh man, I feel like I'm in the sunken place. I'm glad you're still laughing.
If I was her staff, I'd be like, we're going to break some new news. Kamala's going to be like, yeah, I smoked then and I smoked later. I smoked during the Tupac and Snoop eras. So I'm actually kind of cool. That's what I would do.
Right.
And that would,
maybe you could be your campaign manager from here on out.
I mean, I have a little bit of time on Fridays available.
Yeah. As long as you can do the show on Tuesdays.
Exactly. That's my rider.
Oh, God.
Jesus Christ. Well, we got a lot ahead of us.
I know. I didn't think I really was emotionally invested, but now I do just feel kind of depressed. Maybe that's because Michael died. I don't know. Maybe it's unrelated.
Here's a positive spin: is that I think Kamala is so weak politically that she won't benefit enough from being VP to be the presumptive nominee in 4 years if Biden
dies.
Well, Biden's not going to run again. I mean,
transition president.
Yeah, exactly.
Opportunity. Well, let's look on the bright side for a second. California has an incredible apparatus that they built up around Bernie Sanders' campaign, and people are really motivated and organized there. And that Senate seat opening up could be a really incredible opportunity for folks in California. I don't know who they're going to plan on putting up, but we could try to see if we could snag that seat. Which is a huge opportunity, and I'm sure people are already hard at work trying to figure that out. So, let's look on the bright side a little bit too, as goofy as this whole thing is. At least it created an opportunity for us to try to, snag an important seat.
Exactly, because VP isn't that powerful. I mean, there's certain things you staff up. That's nice, and she's going to staff up, a bunch of cops herself. I have no doubt. But whatever, right? Like, let's get that Senate seat.
It's sort of less about like it. I think it's just kind of like just the weight of like, okay, there was that shot in like February where it really looked like Bernie was going to win. And then just like the combination of that defeat and COVID and Michael's passing.
But
it's like the trifecta of my life. And then now like just like seeing fully what this vision is kind of just like, okay. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you would have told like Michael 2018 that it ended up being Biden and Harris,
he'd be like, "Yep,
yeah."
No,
I mean, he knew it was Biden or Bernie, and he probably would have picked Kamala.
Yeah, well, he thought Kamala was going to have a really good run. We were all kind of overestimating.
Yeah, I did too.
But I mean, for this reason, because we knew the party was going to love her. Basically.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
Well, again, the good news is that you're not going to get shot up into stardom riding on Sleepy Joe's coattails. So I think that the likelihood of Kamala Harris being able to ride through like a successful Joe Biden administration to being a real threat, is not too likely.
Exactly.
So I think we're good for tonight. We're going to have in the post game, we have a lot of really great sounds, some stories. We're going to revisit some of our favorite characters and enemies, and then in celebration of Michael's upcoming birthday, we're going to have a toast to Michael with a few friends, Joshua, Ben Burgess, and Napoleon the Legend. So, definitely, stick around for that. And if you're not already subscribing to us on Patreon, definitely join us at patreon.com/TMBS.
Also, just so no one freaks out, Michael was fully endorsing Biden. You should vote for him. This is not us saying don't do that. This is us just being critical, and we have to continue to be critical and push these people.
Yeah. Just to elaborate our line, like we don't think it's the time to shame people about voting right now.
No.
It's good for the conversation to be the ways Harris is unsatisfactory to the left. Biden has not shown any kind of indication that he's going to give anything meaningful to the left. So let's elaborate our problems with her, so it's not just Ben Shapiro calling her a radical Marxist, somehow. Let's have our criticisms be the one, taking up the room.
Exactly.
We all know these people. Neither of these people are going to save any of us, and they're going to be an impediment and a problem. We got to be prepared to fight, and that's my perspective on it. But we're all ready for it. We all know. Yeah, this is our
We're
fight
done
song.
with the current fight we're in, and then we're ready to progress to the new fight.
I'm ready for that fight. Oh my god, I want
Yeah,
that.
that'll be a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys in the post game. Thanks,
Take
Alicia.
care,
Dave.
everybody.